Creating your own reality. Is it possible for me? I am Jennifer K. Hill, the Consciousness Architect, and I am here to tell you that it's not only possible, it's closer than you might think. Welcome to the show. Hello, friends, and welcome back for another episode of Regarding Consciousness. I am Jennifer K. Hill, host of this show and CEO of OptiMatch App. And I'm so grateful to get to bring you a topic that we have never discussed before on this show on Regarding Consciousness today about ancient wisdom and portals. So today, the gentleman joining us is not only a best-selling author who has written 9 books, has 16 documentaries, including a new one on Gaia focused on Egypt. He is also the researcher of ancient civilizations, restricted history, sacred sites, and how they interact with our consciousness. Described by one CEO as perhaps the best metaphysical speaker in the world right now, for 2 decades, he has been an international keynote speaker with notable appearances at the International Science and Consciousness Conference, the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine, and the Association for Research and Enlightenment. He is a regular contributor, as we mentioned, to Gaia and has appeared on the History Channel, BBC, and numerous international radio shows as well. And today we're going to be talking about his new best-selling book. That's right, Portals. Let's see if you can see it here if you're watching on YouTube. And so thank you so much for being here with us, Freddy Silva. Freddy, thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are.
Yeah, so such an interesting topic. We've interviewed many luminaries on this show, scientists, thought leaders, best-selling authors. And when our mutual acquaintance and friend Ariel, the publisher of this book, told me about it, my interest was piqued because I had never really read a book before yours about portals. How did this become one of your areas of expertise, Freddie?
Oh, I've been doing this for about 30 years and talking about it. And Ariel approached me and says, perhaps it's time to actually write about it. And I thought that's a very good idea. The thing with portals is they're like on the Earth's surface where the laws of physics as we know them are a little bit different. It's like the radio station is tuned to a slightly different place. And it allows you to go into another level of reality. And when we've forgot where these places were, people built temples on them like pyramids or Stonehenge and so forth. And they were always used as a place where people would go into another level of reality, access information, bring it back, and apply it in their own lives to make themselves better people while they're still living, and then change society as a whole for the better. So that was my interest, really, is because these things are what I describe as self-help centers. So when we forget that we can do this by ourselves and we go, I need a little bit of help. Yeah, it's right there. The tools are all around the world, and you just collect the tools and you apply them, and that you get to dream the dream awake, as the old people used to say. So I figured that there was something of great importance here, and that for the time was very important, given all the perceived chaos that we're living in right now. It gives us a chance to actually be in control of the situation rather than the world being in control of us.
Hmm. So true. We are at a turning point for humans and civilization. And I know in the book you talk about how many different ancient people and tribes from around the world, ranging from the Andes Mountain to New Zealand to parts of America and South America, and have been studying these portals and utilizing their energies. Tell us a little bit about number one, how the portals are identified, and number two, how we can then tap into the energetic portal. Like for me, for example, I live in Lisbon, and I know you mentioned in the book there are two very prominent portals. One I've been to, the other I haven't. So tell us a little bit more about that, please.
In the old days, and I'm talking about very remote times, indigenous people were more connected to nature, so they could sense everything. And we're electromagnetic beings, essentially, at the core of our being. So these places are also electromagnetic, and the Hopi creation myth really exemplifies the whole point, and that is that they say that in the beginning, the Creator made humans, sends one of them to the South Pole, not the North Pole, which is closer, sends them to the South Pole with a drum, which is exactly what you take to the South Pole. And this guy starts hearing the beat of the Earth Mother, and he starts beating a sympathetic rhythm on his drum. And when there's a sympathetic resonance between the two heartbeats, the Earth is said to send streams of life force to the surface, and the Earth becomes abundant with life. And then they said, but there are some places on the Earth where the energy was much more potent, and they call them the spots of the fawn. And they became the primal sacred places. So you could actually go on the land and go, oh, I can sense that feeling that there's a thinning of the veil between worlds here. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to do my shamanic thing, connect with the management, bring down information, and boom, the information comes out and everybody benefits. The Aboriginal people have exactly the same story with the Jalkiri, the song lines. And they're walking the desert, it's featureless, and they'll turn right on a dime and they'll walk for 60 miles and they get to the next sacred place. And I remember a famous experiment that was done with, I think it was Melbourne University. They tried to do an experiment to see if you could actually follow people using these invisible strips of magnetic tape on the landscape to get from sacred site to sacred site. And the margin of error was less than 3%. But
Mm.
they tried doing that to non-sacred places like car parks or Walmart or whatever, and the margin of error was over 67%. So they figured, so all the sacred sites are connected, and that's what makes them sacred. Because the more that people use these hotspots of energy, the more they're associated with the sacredness of life. And then when we forgot where they are, we built temples on them to make sure that we remembered. And the whole point was to try and bring this concept of togetherness and sort of a connection to everything. So they became the self-help centers of the planet where you go and get some information and help yourself. And yeah, not far from Lisbon, up in the mountain of Sintra, the whole mountain is one great big chthonic site. It has been for over 10,000 years. It's been a draw there. And there are little places where even fighting people, like the soldiers and the Knights Templar, would go there and they'd have these incredible experiences, these visions and out-of-body states. They put down their swords and they stayed and they became itinerant monks for 40 years just to have an experience of what they called God. And it made them better people. And they became the example they wanted to see in the world. Gandhi once said, just be the change you wish to see. And I think that there's nothing really new under the sun in this respect. It's just that we're rediscovering what these people have known all along.
Hmm. So true. I'd be curious to know. I don't think I saw anything in the book, though. I was in Ireland 3 years ago, I think it was, in the springtime. And I went out to, it's a famous kind of half dome thing. Do you know the spot I'm talking about in Ireland outside of Dublin? It's maybe like 45 minutes outside. There
You
was,
grown?
oh, yes. Is that one of those energetic spots?
Oh, very much. In fact, the mound next to it, now is even more important. Hardly anybody pays attention to that one.
I went to both of them. The reason I ask is I was in an Uber on my way out there. The driver is driving me, and I'm listening to just a meditation I've listened to hundreds of times before. And no kidding, here I am, Freddie. I'm meditating in the back, and it's focusing on the throat chakra. And then all of a sudden, boom, the mathematical formula for consciousness got downloaded to me. And I was like, what? What just happened? And it just happened that at the time I was doing a bunch of shows with Deepak Chopra and Don Hoffman. So first I text Deepak. I'm like, Deepak, I just heard da 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 da. And he's yes, Jennifer, of course. And that means this. And so I called Don Hoffman the next day I'm in London. And I'm like, Don, I just got that you have to multiply nothing times everything in order to get to consciousness. And he says, Jennifer, you are 100% right. In all of my mathematical equations, you can't get to consciousness without having a probability space filled with nothing. And I was like, what? But it was the most surprising, energetic experience I've ever had because I'm just sitting in the back of an Uber and boom, down comes this download.
Yeah, that's how it happens. It depends what you're looking for as well. And a lot of people say, oh, portals, negative, evil energy. No, energy is just energy. It doesn't give a damn one way or the other. It's a bit like sticking your fingers in the electrical outlet. You're still going to get hurt. It's just energy. It's neither good or bad. So people who are notable figures in our history, like Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton, Plato got most of his information not by sitting there and philosophizing about it, but literally having these initiation experiences at certain hotspots, which the Greeks already marked as their own portals, which they borrowed from the Egyptians, by the way. It was all plagiarism in a very good way. And he said, no, the experience of traveling in through these portals is what defined my metaphysical doctrine. I just had to basically write it down in very methodical, scholastic terms in case people thought I was away with the fairies. Of course, it was away with the fairies, but the thing is, most people thought that's a bad thing. And in his mind, and Pythagoras as well, he couldn't get enough of this. He said, no, this is how we get the information. It makes life so much easier than sitting there for 10 years reading books and kind of intellectualizing a process, which is actually quite intangible. This way, if you ask the right questions and you go to the right places, you connect with what I call the management, which is like an astral reference library. And sometimes the information comes in very quickly and very vividly if you're very open. Sometimes it happens when you go back home and you have a nice sleep and you wake up in the morning and you can't stop writing like a lunatic. And sometimes it's a coincidence. A book comes through the mail that was meant for somebody else. That's God's way of being invisible, coincidence. So that's how it happens. The invisible world starts communicating with you because it knows how difficult it is to be trapped in the human body and forgetting where you came from and what you're supposed to be doing here. And the Greeks were the last people that said it very well. We're living a kind of a mind blindness. We're having a spiritual blindness. And we spent the rest of our lives reading books, doing podcasts, watching Gaia and going to lectures to find out what it is that we're doing. And they said, you don't have to do that. You just go to these sensitive places on the landscape that our predecessors marked for us for our own benefit. And I think they could see into the future and realize that in the 21st century, they're going to have no idea what they're doing because they're so disconnected from nature. And you're going to be at the mercy of nature. And that's not a good thing. Luck always favors the prepared. And they said, yeah, you're going to be given the tools at these places to make sure that you live your life fully aware and engaged. So some of these people really knew what they were talking about, even though, ironically, they were away with the fairies.
It's so funny you say the fairies. So one of the first times I had ever heard of a quote unquote portal is a dear friend of mine, Altair, who we've had on the show before. And Altair is next level. The man is a portal. He is the only human being on the planet who scientists beg for urine samples and hair samples because he's in a state of DMT or yeah, the God particle every single day, dead sober. That's just how he is. And one day he's in New Zealand, I believe, with his wife and they're on a hike in this place they've hiked to a million times before, and they're with a group, and his wife wants to go veer off down this little path. And so they go and they're veering off, and they can still see the group behind them. And she pulls back the leaves over this particular boulder, and they step through into an alternate dimension. They felt like they were gone about a half hour to an hour, and it was a whole other land that they describe as being more fairy tale like than Disneyland with actual fairies and trees and jungle and all sorts of stuff. And they're in this in between space and time. And they cut and they try to take photos and their phones aren't working there. And they come
Mhm.
back out and only seconds have passed. And there's the group asking where they are. So I know in the book you talk about time and how time can sometimes warp in these circumstances. How and why is that possible?
Because our concept of time in the three-dimensional world bears no resemblance to what it is on other levels of reality. It's the biggest problem actually when communicating. And yeah, I've experienced that many times. And I really didn't know any of this was possible. I'm writing from experience where I began writing about crop circles. That was my first point of research. And lucky enough, that became an international bestseller right out of the gate. Very useful. And it was the first time we matched the science with mysticism of what happens in these unusual hotspots of energy, which behave just like a pyramid, by the way. And you go in, you cross the perimeter of these things, and you could measure the frequency outside that is different from inside, just like a mound or a Stonehenge. We can measure that difference of electromagnetic frequency. And you swear you went in to get a pieces of sample of soil and plants, which took no more than 2 minutes to put into the bag. And then you go back to the car and your wife, or in my case, my ex-wife, you can see how this process is not very conducive to relationships. She says, where have you been for the last 2 hours? And I said, what do you mean 2 hours? I just walked over there and I came back 2 minutes later. You've been gone for 2 hours. And then I began to write these things down because so many other people were experiencing the same thing in the Great Pyramid or in mounds in Ireland. And there's one guy in Wales who was listening to these stories of folklore in Wales, not far from where the stone from Stonehenge came from, by the way. It's called the Mountain of the Angels for a very good reason. It's a description of what happens at the actual mountain. You connect with these otherworldly beings, and he would give watches which were synchronized to anyone who wanted to climb to the top. So when they came back down, they'd hand in the watch, and he said anywhere between 5 to 20 minutes would be different between the watches when they left the base camp and they got to the top of the mountain and back. And these were digital watches. You can't just fast forward or anything. And he said, no, there is a portal there where the time dilation just seems to have an effect on physical objects. And this happens all around the world, even in southern India. in Arunachala, the famous Red Hill, which is the repository of the knowledge of all the gods before the flood. And people go up there for an hour. They come back down. It's been a day since they've been gone. So it is funny. It does have its own little sort of anecdotes to go with it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I know what you're saying about India. I was just in India and Sri Lanka for the first time in December of this past year. And I don't know if there are any portals in Sri Lanka, but I had two of the most profound out of body meditative experiences, dead sober, in Sri Lanka that were mind blowing. And then I got to visit about 30 pyramids. A friend of mine who we've had on the show, Paripatri, she and her family have built 22,000 pyramids around India. And just even sitting, even if it's
Wow.
in a portal underneath a pyramid while you meditate has been shown to have an impact on the consciousness.
Very much. And these things are everywhere. Just because we built up so much urban centers doesn't mean these things don't exist. I was having a chat with a radio host yesterday in Manhattan, and he said, "Be great if we have one in Manhattan." I said, "I can name you two of them. One is the obelisk that was put there by the Scottish Rite Freemasons, who are the Templars under a different name, who are the Essenes under a different name. They just keep changing their name. And yeah, and they marked that hotspot there and they put the pillar there for that very reason to attract your attention visually, but you're already within the energy field of what's under it. And you go across Central Park, there's a glacial erratic with a lot of scratches on it from the rocks that were pressed onto the stone by the glaciers. And I was walking through Central Park and it was like, oh, hello. You get this immediate sort of sense of being drawn somewhere because I've done this so many times. I can sense it. I can see this stuff already. I've become very sensitive to subtle energy now. And I just sit there, yeah, and I'm away with the fairies again. There's a couple of coffee shops as well, even here in Portal Land, Maine, as I call it. There's a friend of mine who owns a coffee shop, and she said, I said, is there something about the building that drew you to put your business here? She says, yeah, the building's a nice location and all of that, but there's something about the quality of the place where the building actually is. I said, yeah, used to be an Abenaki sacred site before it was built here. I was doing a little bit of work, and she picked up on it immediately. And people love going there. The coffee is fantastic, but it's the fact that you're drawn, your consciousness is saying, listen, stop thinking. You're tired. I'm your real guide. I'm going to tell you that I need to go and sit at this hotspot to put myself together and get energized. So you just walk down the street, you go into this thing, you have a little coffee, and before you leave, you feel, oh, I feel so much better. Not because just of the coffee, but because you're in this environment that allows your electromagnetic grid of your body to be replenished, and then you can go back into your daily life. So again, very practical information.
Mm. I like to imagine people's questions as they watch or listen to the show. And the question I hear in everybody's mind right now is, how do you become attuned to the subtle energies? I feel like so many of us live these noisy, full lives where we can barely hear our children or our boss or our spouse or friend asking for something. How does one attune themselves so that you can feel these subtler energies?
You remember when you first took your driving test and you were sweating bricks and you think, I can't do this. And look at you now. It's the same thing. One of the tricks that I usually employ is to tell people, tell me 10 sounds that you heard in the last 15 minutes. And they'll get to one, maybe two, and they'll blank. I said, right, now go out of the building, go for a walk, extend your vision, make your ears 50 times bigger than they are, take in everything and come back in 15 minutes. Okay. So they come back. Maybe 10 sounds you just heard in the last 10 minutes, and they can't stop talking. There's a point where they can hear the grass moving, or the wheat is starting to expand in the sun. Someone's hanging out the washing. There's a bird feeding the youngsters in a little nest, and you can hear the little sort of chirpy, chirpy going on. You've just become much more sensitive to your environment. That's what it's about. You've become part of the bigger landscape. Now, you keep doing that over and over again, and you ask a question is, I'm looking for some information on this, and just go for a walk. Don't intellectualize it. And your subconscious will be drawn to the same energy and you'll stand on that spot. And sometimes it might be unremarkable and you'll get a download in some way. That's how you become more sensitive. And again, you do it more and more often and it becomes second nature. People were telling me 30 years ago when I started to learn dowsing that you don't need a dowsing rod, you don't need a pendulum. I said, but yeah, but I need to know. But your body already knows. You're just trying to intellectualize the process. Let it go. In fact, the more you do it, the more you realize that the answer has already come to you before the instrument has given you a reaction. And there was one day when I just had that confidence. I thought, you know what? I just got something on my rod, but I actually heard the answer in my head before the rods did anything. So I stopped. And now I can tell you, looking out of my window, where the energy lines are crossing, what polarity they are, where they're moving to, and sometimes I can see them in color. And that's just 30 years of doing it again and again. And yes, you can actually start, interacting with your intention, which means that you're developing that inner knowing where you can shape your intention to manifest much more quickly. It's a very dangerous process because you develop a huge ego, and that's where you got to look in the mirror every morning and go, "Whoa, I'm working with raw energy here. Where is this going?" So you have to be very much in control of yourself and be very centered all the time with this stuff because it can lead you in places where you don't want to go. So the more you do it, the more you become sensitive to your environment, and then you have the power of prediction, the power of healing, the power of Newton discovering the laws of gravity and so forth. There's no end to what you can do, but the trick is you got to stay grounded as well. You got to make sure that you're in control. It is not in control of you. Otherwise, you're back to the chaos, and that's not a good place.
What do you do to support yourself so that way you don't get distracted or engulfed by your ego?
I had some good teachers, and they said every morning you look in the mirror and say, "What the hell have I just done?" Yeah, you have to step back out of yourself. There's a bit of humor involved in this, and yeah, I have to step back and go, I don't actually know anything. So anytime anyone says to me, "Oh, you're an expert at this," yeah, I might be, but you know what? I don't consider myself an expert because I want to learn. The moment I become an expert, the arrogance comes in. I'll start tuning conversations out. I don't want to do that. So I'm very mindful of that anytime that I feel like I'm stepping out of my own bounds. And it's a bit like you stepping out of yourself and watching yourself behind a plate glass window and saying, you should be quiet now and let the other person speak and learn a little bit. And you learn to do this all the time. You become self-adjusting all the time. And I also tend to, at these times, take my camera to all these sacred places and use my camera as my filter, as my guide, to shut down my mental state in order to just to connect with parts of the temple. And then I start writing things down because the temple starts talking back to me. I'm having a very quiet conversation with what I call my extended family. They never let me down, and they're people I actually want to hang out with during Christmas for days. You know how it is. Some families you just don't want to go and hang out at Christmas. These people I do because I trust them, and they feed me the information that becomes the foundation for all my books. But then, of course, I have to do the work. I have to go to libraries. I have to put the facts together. But so that's how I do it. I just have to take a little step back and say, I don't know everything. And that's my place where I become very humble. I really don't know everything, despite 9 books.
Including a couple bestsellers and 16 documentaries, but who's counting?
Yeah, I still don't know anything. I know nothing. And it's
Yeah.
a good place to be. You don't know everything, and I think it's almost like being a child sometimes where you become much more. And I'm channeling David Bowie here, one of my heroes. He said, "You know what? I've accomplished so much, John, and I'm still experimenting." And it was much the same person. He never really developed a huge ego. He was in control of his creative environment, but he knew that he wasn't the environment. He was basically a channel of that environment, and I think he made a peace with that sort of statement. So yeah, I look at people like that who did it really well, who became very successful, like Gandhi or people like that, and how they handled it. I remember Gandhi saying one day, someone was interviewing him and they said, "What do you think of democracy, Mr. Gandhi?" And he says, "I think it's a lovely idea. I can't wait for someone to try it." And he had this wonderful sense of humor that brought him down to earth every single time. And I thought, that's a very good example. I think I'm going to do that.
Mm, I'm just lost in the Gandhi quote that you just gave. I think that as human beings, the more power, the more knowledge, the more money that any of us gets, the more tempting and easier it is to lose ourselves and lose our identity and lose that self-awareness. And I think that somebody once described it to me as you gain more power, more money, more notoriety, whatever it might be, that you're like a light that grows brightly, and dark energy is like a moth that then is drawn towards you. And that's where we have the opportunity as human beings to be consciously aware and thoughtful of, am I still living in my truth, or am I being dissuaded or distracted by perhaps the material realm. And I think it's a dance that we have an opportunity to do as we grow and evolve ourselves as human beings.
The dance of Shiva. Yes, the light and the dark. No, it's absolutely true. It's about being mindful, being conscious, not letting the world run you. You run the world. You're in control. And also, and acceptance is also the key to everything, except that you come down here to achieve something, but you're not totally aware of it. If you are, kudos to you. Even if it takes you until your last breath to find out what you're doing here, at least you've done it. You've figured out what you've come here to do. And the trick is that it's we've because we've incarnated, we're not perfect anyway. If you were perfect, you wouldn't bother to incarnate. So you're a work in progress, and therefore you don't beat yourself up. You know that you're going to mess up once in a while. The trick is don't make a habit of it. Learn, apologize. One of the hardest things is to apologize, and I've done it many times. I started off. Again, when your first book is an international bestseller, you can run away with it. You think, great, I can say what the hell I please. No, you can't. And the universe will whack me down. And I'll go back and picked up the phone and said, listen, I'm sorry. We had this conversation. I was really arrogant about it. I think I got this totally wrong. Tell me exactly what you were saying last time, and let's start this conversation again. It takes courage to do that, but after a while, it's actually really liberating because it's like, what do I have to lose by apologizing and saying I got it wrong? I didn't. I thought I knew everything, but I really don't. And in fact, it's a wonderful way to take charge of your life and take control of it. And I think people will respect you for that as well. So yeah, it's a constant work in progress, and the more humor you bring to the situation, the more you also help yourself. I think the Brits have a good way of doing that. And we were talking about the humor during COVID when things were a little bit scary for everybody. And we had the best humor and the best sarcasm coming out of Britain, taking this really serious situation and making the light of it. And that's what brings you down to earth again, and just say, and it forces you to accept that sometimes things are beyond your control and just carry on with life. Just be like a reed in the wind and adapt as the wind blows. And sometimes the wind will stop and you go back to being upright. I think that's a wonderful analogy.
Mhm. Very powerful, Freddie. I would love to hear, is there anything I haven't asked you in this interview today that you would like to share, or piece of wisdom, or something that you would like to recap for everybody before we tell them where to connect with you and find the book?
Oh my God, that's a hard question. The thing is, I used to get laughed at for never having a cell phone. I was the last person on the planet, I think, to have a landline. And then people kept texting me on the landline, and I had to explain that that does not work with landline. So eventually I got a phone. I said, but the reason why I don't have these things is because I watch people getting distracted with a little rectangle, and they're getting all the information, their news, but who's providing you the news? Where does it come from? What's the bias? It could be propaganda, and usually it is. I said, I don't want to be sucked into that world. And I think that we've come to a point now, mostly around the world now, where we are facing a huge crisis of existence. We are being literally thrown at so much propaganda thrown around with things that don't actually exist. And everybody's fighting over things which are really non-events, really. And the idea is to take all this information, take all this work that I've put together, and that of my peers as well, and use it as tools. Build a little toolbox. And you might not believe what I say, and that's fine because you're not me and I'm not you. But if there's something that I said that makes sense, put it in the toolbox and then go out into the land. The land is your best teacher. Sit under a tree. The tree knows better than you. Trust me on this one. Most trees are hotspots on their own. They'll go to a sacred site or just by a body of water, hang out with where ancient people used to hang out because they knew better than you where these places are where you connect, and build up your toolbox and then use that toolbox in your daily life and keep improving it. That's the best advice I can give because it worked for me. And 30 years later, I'm a much better and different person than I was before. And it's still not perfect. It's still a work in progress. So the idea is that don't beat yourself up. Just do the best you can and enjoy good coffee and good Portuguese pastries.
Mm, beautiful. I love that, Freddie. Where can people connect with you with your new best-selling book portals? I know, of course, they can go to Gaia, see your latest documentary. Where should people go to follow you and connect to your work?
Oh, the central hotspot where everything exists is invisibletemple.com, my website.
Yes, and do keep your eyes out. Freddie did tell me before offline that he just sold out 2 tours to Portugal, which of course was a personal interest to me, but do keep your eyes out because it does sound like Freddie does personalized, customized tours of some of these sacred sites. And Freddie, thank you for sharing your wisdom and studying this and making it available to all of us out there who might not be as wise or as open or receptive to these subtler energies that you've been studying for over 3 decades. So I really just acknowledge and appreciate you for going out there and pulling all of this wisdom together to share with us.
Thank you very much for having me and sharing this all around the world as well. It's all part of the plan.
Mm. Thank you to all of you out there listening, watching, whenever, wherever that you're joining us from. Our intention for you today is may you find these portals in your own life. May you seek them out. May you energetically attune to them. And may it allow you to evolve your own consciousness to live a more happy, more fulfilled, and more meaningful life. I am Jennifer Cahill, and I thank you for your time.